Kevin Marr joins me now. Kevin, welcome back to the show. Now, we
Hi,
don't
George.
know,
Nice to see you.
and you're looking great. We don't know if Keir Starmer has been fined, but we do know that he said that if he was fined, he would quit. Now, there's an ominous silence coming from the centre of Labour as to whether he has been fined or expects to be in the next days. My instinct is that that would happen during the week, not over the weekend. In any case, and the police have taken the precaution of confirming that witnesses to the events in Durham are prepared to give evidence in court if necessary. And of course, that would only be necessary if Starmer and presumably Rayner refused to accept the fixed penalty notice. What can you tell us about the Durham brouhaha first and foremost?
Well, it's high stakes stuff, isn't it? Keir Starmer, about 6 weeks ago, as you say, confirmed that if he's given a fixed penalty notice for an alleged infraction of the COVID lockdown rules when he was on a campaign visit up in the northeast of England in County Durham in 2020, if he's found guilty and given a fixed penalty notice, then he'll resign as leader of the Labour Party. I mean, that's a pretty stark position. And I think there's two interesting aspects. One is that I think he's trying to juxtapose himself with Boris Johnson, who is obviously I think it's fair to say, a fairly louche character as regards these matters, and obviously presided over a culture in number 10 of lots of parties during lockdown in flagrant breach of the rules that he, of course, as Prime Minister, was insisting the rest of us obey. So I think Keir Starmer is very keen to kind of juxtapose himself personally with Boris Johnson. And of course, Keir Starmer is, in his previous life, Director of Public Prosecutions. So as the legal system's chief advocate for the prosecution, feels that he can't really do anything else, I suspect. So this is high stakes stuff. Keir Starmer is a very cautious man, and his leadership of the Labour Party has been very cautious over the last couple of years, too cautious for many people's tastes. But this is a pretty high wire move that he announced. I think a lot of people didn't think he would do it, but he has done it. I think he probably feels a little bit that it cuts him to the quick as a character, that, as I say, as a chief prosecutor, that if he is found guilty of an infraction of COVID rules, that it would be massively personally embarrassing to him, I think. So I think he's prepared to push all the chips out on the table and take a gamble on this one, on the basis that he feels that he hasn't broken the COVID rules, that he can show that that he may have had a beer and he may have had a curry with some of his colleagues, but he went and did some other work afterwards. So it was classed as a work event. Rather than a party, which is obviously slightly the reverse of what was happening in Downing Street, where I think it was pretty clear there were parties. So I think he feels that he's not in breach of the rules, and that if he stakes everything on that basis, that if he's cleared, that they'll get quite a political boost from it. But of course, the quid pro quo is if he is given a fixed penalty notice, then he's toast. He's put himself in the toaster. He's pressed the button down in that respect. So this is high wire stuff, and we're going to find out in the next week or so. I mean, it's just one of the perverse situations, George. I mean, you'll know far better than I, but I can't remember a situation where both the Prime Minister of the day and the leader of the opposition of the day may both be gone by the end of the summer. It's as stark as that.
It is unprecedented. I said so in my opening remarks. The problem, and thanks for that summary, it was perfect. The problem with Keir Starmer's side of that summary is, you called him louche, I called him debauched. The problem for Starmer is that everybody, that's already baked in, that's already in the price of Boris Johnson. People expect him to be doing debauched things, and they knew that when they elected him, both as the leader of the Conservative Party and then as the Prime Minister of Britain. Both sets of electors knew that. And so nobody is surprised about the behaviour of Boris Johnson. And it doesn't seem to have harmed him all that much in his rise through politics. The second problem is Keir Starmer is already in trouble as a lackluster, overcautious, uncharismatic, and quite schismatic, as it's turned out, leader of the opposition. This is the man that has kicked out his predecessor, in whose shadow cabinet he was happy to sit in a variety of forms, of positions. So, in a way, there are many Labour people kind of hoping that the Durham Constabulary do the job for them and precipitate a Labour leadership election, don't you think?
I think it's always fascinating in the kind of Labour politics and the Labour tribe that there's no people tend not to wait for vacancies. They tend to be on manoeuvres early, and that's clearly what's happening even at this point with Keir Starmer. There are various pretenders to the throne already organising very subtly, or perhaps not too subtly, campaigns and campaign machines ready for a potential leadership election if he goes. I mean, it's one of those situations where as I say, Starmer has been very cautious, and I think he temperamentally is a very cautious man. Perhaps that's a part of the course with having the career that he's had in the law. But as I say, he's put it all out there on this decision. There is no wiggle room. You either get a fixed penalty notice or he doesn't. And if he does, then he goes or he doesn't go. It's as simple as that. And there is no way, I think, of trying to subtly recontextualize the announcement that he made. I thought the announcement that he made when he made it was probably, in many respects, his finest moment of the last couple of years anyway. I think he genuinely had some emotion there, and there was some consequence there. Now, that's not been the hallmark of the rest of his leadership, I think it's fair to say. But on this issue, he's put it out there, and he will either be proven right in his legal judgment that he's done nothing wrong and that the Durham Constabulary do not give him a fixed penalty notice, or if they do, he's got to go. And it's as simple as that. And his deputy, Angela Rayner, who was there as well on this occasion, she'll have to go as well, which is a massive vacuum to leave at the top of the Labour Party when we're probably 2 years away from an election. And of course, the paradox here is that, for all Boris Johnson's sort of peccadillos and failures of character, and as well as politics and of character, that he, for now at least, has managed to tiptoe past the Partygate scandal of all the kind of the culture that he presided over in Downing Street during lockdown. He's managed to get past it. Now, 40% of his MPs, a few weeks ago, obviously voted against him in a vote of no confidence. That's pretty significant. But 60% didn't. He lives to fight another day, and we're probably 3 or 4 weeks away from the summer recess when kind of Westminster, of course, goes into its kind of summer abeyance, and we're waiting for the party conference season. So Boris Johnson, paradoxically, having been banged to rights about parties and received a fixed penalty notice himself, as many of his colleagues did as well, manages to survive this squall, and Keir Starmer potentially doesn't. I mean, that will be, I think, quite a paradoxical situation. But as I say, we could end up with a situation perfectly plausibly where the leader of the Labour Party and the opposition, and the leader of the Conservatives and the Prime Minister of the day, are both gone by the autumn. I mean, that's the stakes at the moment.
Indeed. I was drawing the comparison with the end of the long Conservative government. It seemed long. Of course, it's now getting on for exactly the same number of years, 13 years of Tory misrule, culminating in the 17th Earl of Hume and the stench of dereliction, corruption, personal vice, and all the rest of it. But the difference then was, Kev, Labour was a thrusting opposition. Harold Wilson was was the man to take over. And he had at least 10, maybe a dozen cabinet colleagues, all of whom could plausibly have been the Prime Minister. Yeah. And they had a programme. Didn't work out all that well. But their programme in 1964 sounded hell of a plausible. The white hot heat of the technological revolution, a vision of a manufacturing, modernised industrial Britain, and so on. Now we have a government falling apart and an opposition falling apart at exactly the same time.
It's incredible, it is. And I mean, you make a good comparison there. I mean, there's the period, I suppose, through the 80s and 90s, Thatcher, Major, and then culminating in the Blair victory and New Labour victory in 1997. But yes, I mean, what's more interesting probably is that comparison between the 13 years of Conservative government from 1951 to 1964, 3 Tory leaders in that period: Churchill, Eden, 4, of course, Macmillan, and then Alec Douglas-Home as well. And of course, what you got in that period was, something that Disraeli called the temper of the times. That you ended up with a Conservative government that was burnt out in terms of its programme, but it was burnt out in terms of its moral authority as well, beset by all kinds of scandals, intelligence scandals, sex scandals, financial scandals, and all the rest of it. And there you had Harold Wilson and Labour personifying a new age, a much more meritocratic and a northern accented economist in Harold Wilson, very, very intelligent man, youngest cabinet minister of the 20th century, of course. But they personified a new age and a new time. And the difficulty at the moment is we're not at that point. I'm reminded of the remark of Wilson's successor, Jim Callaghan, of course. He was obviously his chancellor in 1964, went on to become prime minister in the late 70s, when again there was a sense of kind of drift and decay and a government falling apart. And of course he remarked that a sea change. He was an old mariner himself, of course, and remarked there was a sea change taking place in British politics, which of course brought Margaret Thatcher to power in May 1979. And it's a great phrase, this sense of a sea change. It's something that's inexorable and elemental, and you can't do very much about it. And what he was saying was, look, actually, the kind of social democratic program of the previous 20 years or so is kind of, the flaws and the failings of it are now quite apparent, and we've not got plan B, and the public is looking for something else and is determined to move to something else, and they obviously went for Margaret Thatcher from that point onwards. What's not happening at the moment is that a sea change is not taking place in British politics. I think everybody's pretty clear about that. As you say, you've got Boris Johnson, who is this extraordinary figure. I mean, Alan Duncan, the Conservative MP who served as one of his junior ministers at the Foreign Office, brilliantly encapsulated him as Berlusconi. He's got all the kind of characteristics of Silvio Berlusconi, or one of these kind of, let's Peronist South American figures, really, Boris Johnson, that people vote for him, despite all the flaws, despite all the limitations of him. He can still command the support of the British public. And you look at the polling, even in the last few days, it's not radically changing. No. It's not. This is not a government that's collapsing. Boris Johnson's premiership may end up going, but the Tories may end up replacing him, and they may end up winning the next election on that basis, which is, of course, what happened in the early 90s when Margaret Thatcher went and John Major took over. The public take a view, well, actually, we've had enough of her, but he seems like a nice chap, let's give him a go. And the danger for Labour is you end up in that period where people have eventually had enough of Boris and the shenanigans, to put it mildly, that follow him around everywhere. He can't seem to shake any of this loose, and they opt for somebody who has a very different tone and style. And then the public say, well, actually, we can keep with the Tories because effectively we've got a new government anyway, which is slightly the trick Boris himself pulled off by, of course, replacing Theresa May and the David Cameron era. I mean, people forget the Tories have been in power for 12 years. Boris is the third prime minister. He's the third iteration of a Tory, austerity Tory government, really. But each time it kind of re-energizes when you change the leader. And I think Tory MPs will be looking at that model and saying, let's let Boris burn himself out, and then we'll replace him. And we're at that very, very useful point about 18 months away from a general election, and potentially we have a new leader, a new prime minister, and people say, well, let's see what they can do. And that's the big challenge for Labour, is in some respects they want Boris to stay, frankly, because by the time of the next election he may well be a big negative for them. But the polls are not showing that right now, and that sea change in British politics has not happened yet. It may happen, it may change. Boris may be a one-trick pony. He can't sort of shake off all the scandals. We've got an economy that's in the doldrums, 10% inflation, rising interest rates, teetering on the brink of recession, lots of problems in the system, big energy price rises in the autumn. Boris as a kind of a avuncular figure that people find amusing as much as anything else. Well, you perhaps won't find him amusing when you get your heating bill in the autumn, and that's the point where he becomes a kind of an unserious man for very serious times, and that may be the point where the Tories changing. But if they do, that isn't necessarily the end of the Tories.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Kevin, in a word, 2 words, 5, 10 words. If not Starmer, who? Who will be the next leader of the Labour Party?
I think that the Labour Party has never had a woman leader in its 114-year history. There was a sense last time around that there probably should be a movement to get a woman elected. The Tories, of course, have had 2 women prime ministers in this time. I think the smart money would probably be on Lisa Nandy.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for joining us.